Hey, what's up, everybody? And welcome to another episode of the Spartan Nation Podcast brought to you by Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation. I'm your host, Matt Lonsberry, here, as always, with my co host, Aiden McCrone. And there's a whole heap of stuff to talk about today. A lot of news for Michigan State football throughout the day today. Started with some good news, then some kind of expected news and some bad news kind of all happened at once this evening. So we're just going to kind of dive into it. As always, if you guys have any questions, go ahead, drop those in the comments, and we'll answer as many of those as we can. But for now, we're just going to kind of jump into kind of everything that's happened so far today. And like I said, started with some good news. Michigan State lands defensive tackle Jalen Sami from Colorado. This is a guy who's played a lot of college football. He was part of the 2017 class for Colorado, actually, and then took a gray shirt, which is kind of a thing that is from a bygone era, where you commit to a school knowing that you're not going to be on scholarship that first year, and then with a kind of a promise you're going to be put on scholarship afterwards. So he comes to Colorado as a gray shirt in 2017, red shirts his 2018 season, and then plays his first college football for Mel Tucker during 2019 at Colorado. So now, after 4 years as part of the Buffaloes program, he comes to Michigan State. He's a big dude, 6'6", right around 330 pounds. And so just a guy who is expected to come in and help Michigan State plug up the middle of that defensive line. So we'll start with that, but just to kind of give people kind of a lowdown of everything we're going to get through today. Keon Coleman confirmed he's transferring to Florida State. He put that on social media around 4:30 on Instagram Live. So we're obviously going to talk about that today. And then kind of the most surprising news of the day was TCU cornerback transfer Kee'yon Stewart, who committed to Michigan State on May 6th, I believe. He put out a post today on social media, and he has flipped that commitment from Michigan State to Arkansas. So we're going to talk about all these different things, but we're going to start with Jalen Sami, the defensive tackle from Colorado. Aiden, as you saw that news come across, I'm sure you looked into him a little bit. What sticks out about Jalen Sami?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely gonna add some insurance to that defensive tackle position. We were talking about earlier, like during spring practice, uh, just the different players we could see kind of moving inside and outside, and he kind of solidifies an inside spot. I don't really know if he's a starter off the bat. I don't really see that happening, but I do see him adding some much needed depth to that defensive tackle position. I know that they had a lot of injuries last year, and then other players like Deshaun Mallory entered the portal. So just kind of with all that being considered, it's good that they picked him up. I know Colorado's really cleaning house right now with Deion
Right.
Sanders. So, he's a player with a lot of experience. I think he started over 30 games in his career at Colorado.
Yep.
So that's a player that Mel Tucker is familiar with as well. So I think that really helps that defensive tackle spot.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan State really regressed in run defense last year, and a lot of that, I mean, that's not just um, because, I mean, there's a lot of factors that went into that. One of them being a lot of injuries up front. Then you throw in the some of the suspensions that came from the Michigan Tunnel incident too, and so the defensive line that they went into the year with was far in a way different than what they ended the year with, and that certainly played a part in the increased numbers. I think I looked it up when I wrote the story of Jalen Sami transferring to Michigan State today, that Michigan State was 102nd last year in rushing yards allowed per game. They were tied for 85th, I think, in yards per carry allowed. So We've talked about a little bit this spring already that we like the defensive line that Michigan State has coming into the 2023 season. But as you mentioned, you can never have too much depth up front in the trenches on both sides of the ball. But that was an area that Michigan State really got hit hard with attrition last year. And like I said, a big dude, 6'6", 330 pounds. He's gonna eat up a lot of blocks. I didn't watch a ton of film on him or anything after he committed because again we had a bunch of news break today. But I did watch a little bit, and yeah, and he's a guy that opposing offenses are going to have to pay attention to. To your point, I don't know that he's going to be a day one starter or anything like that, but I can see him used situationally for sure. You talk about third and short situations, obvious run situations like that. Definitely can see him in there on those. Maybe first or second down when you're trying to get teams in third and long, and then you take them off the field for those pass rushing downs. But yeah, this is a guy who, at least on paper, looks like a nice solid pickup for Michigan State and a guy who can make an impact.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think when you look at how they kind of have redone this whole defensive line, just including the edge rushers, bring in transfers, you have guys like, Chris Bogle, Timi Sedele. You have someone like Jalen Sami that you can now put with Derek Harmon, and then also Alex Van Summeren,
Yep.
and kind of a younger group of D tackles. And that, yeah, there's kind of a good mix that you see there. Deron Reynolds obviously is new to the program. This is his first year. So he definitely has a lot to work with in terms of just flexibility and kind of different types of styles and players on that D line. And it could potentially be a staple for that defense if they keep all those guys healthy. But then again, like that's a big if, because we did see a lot of those guys go down last season that stayed. Um, so yeah, just kind of looking ahead a little bit, there's a lot more depth than we saw last season, on both interior and outside on the edge. So that's something a little bit that fans should be looking forward to, for a defense that is really looking to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I like Michigan State's defensive line a lot right now. You mentioned a lot of the different tackles, a good mix of some transfers who are going to bring some immediate experience from at other places, but just bring guys who have played a lot of football. Derek Harmon was really good last year. I think it's the redshirt freshman last year, kind of burst onto the scene. Was called upon with Jacob Slade being banged up for a good chunk of the year, and I thought performed pretty well there. Maverick Hansen, as you mentioned, is a guy who can be like a backup and take a few snaps here and there to give guys a blow. Um, I like Simeon Barrow has shown flashes of being really good, and then you mentioned a young guy like Alex Van Summeren, who was a four-star guy. That's just the interior. Then you talk about the edge guys with Tunmise Adelaide, who can play inside and outside, looking more like outside for right now. But and Chris Bogle, if he's back healthy, a guy who can get to the sideline and protect the edge. By Job is a guy who was a four-star, borderline top 50 caliber high school player, and is a guy who will compete to get on the field right away. I don't know if he will or not, but a guy that high in a program that had a need for high level prospects. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see him out there too. So like, I'm really starting to like this front seven um, for this defense. So can you add a little bit more, I guess, with the defensive line, the tackles, the edges, and then what they bring with the linebackers too? What do you see out of this front seven, Aiden?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of potential. I think that when you add in kind of Windman and Halliday and Snow coming back, I really think they're gonna improve on the run game. I really do believe that. It's kind of, I mean, like you said, they were like 106 or something in the
Yeah.
country, so there's not really much room to go but up. there. But yeah, I mean the coverage will still be a big question mark. Obviously, I would assume kind of passing downs, they put Winman and Snow in at the linebacker positions. And then, yeah, you have a lot of decent pass rushers. I mean, you can even put Winman on the edge during passing downs. So again, yeah, there's like a lot of flexibility there. Tunmi Sedele is kind of more of a power guy, power rusher. He's a lot larger than some of the other ends. You got you have players like Bogle, who's probably better in a pass rush situation. Avery Dunn showed last year that he could be useful in some pass rush situations. I mean, even someone like By Job, you could see
Yeah.
him getting in um, during that time. So yeah, again, just having a good mix of transfers and kind of underclassmen for that development and for that growth. I mean, I really think Harmon is going to be a player that's going to have a breakout season. I know a lot of MSU fans already know who he is, but I think he's a legit threat to be, all Big Ten type of player.
Yeah.
Um, at the end of this season, I think he's really developed well over the last 2 years. And yeah, we can see him being an all conference player this season.
Right, for sure. We're going to move on now a little bit to some expected news, but it was confirmed today. Keon Coleman himself was on Instagram Live and committed to Florida State. This is one of just two places that he ended up visiting. I know he got a lot of interest from multiple programs around the country, but he visits Florida State first a couple weekends ago, and then takes a trip to Ole Miss. Had some plans to visit Texas A&M and I believe Louisville, but after visiting Ole Miss, he canceled the trips to A&M and Louisville and just zeroed in kind of on Ole Miss and Florida State, and chose Florida State today. So let's start with the Michigan State angle, since we know we are a Michigan State show. Now that it's official, and we know 100% fact that Michigan State will not have Keon Coleman running up and down the field this fall. What's the impact, Aiden? Like, what's the just give me the 411 on where Michigan State's at now at wide receiver, and how this impacts their 2023 season.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it the last podcast and a little while ago too, but that schedule is pretty brutal regardless
Right.
of who that is. I mean, we talked about that with Thorne and kind of how many wins does losing, Thorne and Coleman, how many games does that lose you or, win you? Um, so yeah, they're definitely gonna miss him a lot for, those 50-50 games, kind of like Maryland, Iowa. I mean, if Caden Hauser is the starting quarterback, I mean, even Kim, it's gonna be hard for, breaking a new quarterback in, missing a guy with that level of NFL upside. So yeah, I mean, it hurts, but in the win-loss column, I don't know how much of an impact it makes just because of how hard the schedule is already.
Right.
So it could lose them a game, maybe 2 games, but nothing that they can't control themselves to meet their goals or, the fans' goals of, making a bowl game, around 6 wins. So yeah,
Right.
from the MSU angle, it does hurt, but there's really not a lot that you can work with. There is only one ball still on
Sure.
the field, so yeah, getting that to other players is also of importance.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we can debate the impact on wins and losses. I think Michigan State was gonna had a tough, as you mentioned, had a tough season ahead of them, regardless if Keon Coleman is here or not. But it certainly hurts the offense to not have that kind of number one go-to option in the pass game. a guy who can win those 50-50 balls, can come up with a first down on maybe a play that a good chunk of guys just aren't able to make a play on a certain ball or whatnot. But I mean, I could argue that maybe there's a bigger impact on. In fact, I would stand on this. I think there's been a bigger impact maybe on morale than actual
Right.
on-field results. Which that does. I mean, that can have an impact on recruiting and momentum and things like that, and what you're trying to sell your program or how you're trying to sell your program. And I'm not. And by the way, we're not taking anything away from Keon when we say we don't know how much of an impact wins and losses this has. We've both said, Aiden and I both, that there's no doubt he was going to be Michigan State's best player coming into this season. It's just that there's a difference between losing a wide receiver and losing a quarterback for the year. And Michigan State did that too, but the quarterback position was already kind of up in the air going into 2023 anyway. So yeah, it's tough for morale. It's not the best look when you lose your top player to the transfer portal and but to your point, Michigan State is going to have a tough road ahead, regardless if he was here or not. I do think you could argue that as Michigan State breaks into new quarterback, there was some benefit there to having a bona fide guy on the outside who
Hmm.
you can trust and target. And defenses are going to bracket Coleman this year if he's at Michigan State. They're going to have a safety over the top. They're going to double team him a lot and make other guys beat them. But that also does occupy another defender. Um, and so yeah, there's give and take there. Certainly would be nice to see him on the field again in green and white this fall. Um, the unfortunate, I mean, I'm a traditional guy. I know Aiden, you have some traditional characteristics too. The thing that bothers me, and when I say bothered, I'm just saying, like, for me, I've always been a um when you see some guy playing in the NFL, oh yeah, he played for such and such college program, and you remember like what they did at this college program, and now with the transfer portal era, it's like, oh yeah, he played for this school and that school and this school, so it's just not the same, and that's a bummer. Um, Certain guys, well, one guy who transferred who is kind of beloved by both fan bases still would be Jalen Hurts he's beloved
Yeah.
by Alabama and he's beloved by Oklahoma. I think he's like
Hmm.
the only guy that I know of that is beloved by both fan bases that he played for and is kind of still part of the club, if you will, for both fan bases. Most of these other guys, they transfer and we're not exactly burning jerseys, but it's a little bit like LeBron leaving Cleveland for Miami. Like Cleveland was really upset and started burning jersey and things like that. I mean, I don't know if there's any jersey burning going on in East Lansing tonight, but it's just unfortunate. It's just a bummer to see, um, because Keon could have been uh, one of those guys like a Charles Rogers or um, a shoot, Plaxico Burris,
Plaxico.
who,
Yeah.
yeah, like one of those guys who you just, hey, remember when he was at Michigan State? Remember this game that he had? Could have been one of those guys, and I know that's not in the grand scheme of things, that's not that important, but that's just kind of my nostalgia side coming out a little bit, and it's just unfortunate. But Michigan State moves forward. You put up a piece, or you wrote a piece about the kind of the young guys that they have in that wide receiver room that we published this week. Go check it out on our Facebook page, or you can find us if you Google Spartan Nation SI. You can find our website and read about the guys lower on the depth chart who now have an opportunity to step up and make a bigger impact for Michigan State this year. We talked about in our last pod, and I'll direct our audience to that pod too to get more on the wide receiver room. But we talked about Tyrell Henry and Antonio Gates Jr., John Glover, some other guys who have an opportunity to step up. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to stay on the wide receiver topic. Um, After Keon entered the portal at the end of April, Michigan State started to kind of do some homework on some transfer portal guys. One of them was Tyler Harrell, who was an Alabama transfer. Um, he ended up committing to Miami this sometime this week, or maybe this last weekend. Um, was it Jadai
Yeah, Ja'Day
Walker
Walker.
from Grand
Yep.
Valley State? He was another guy who visited Michigan State. He ended up committing to Texas A&M. AJ Henning from Michigan. I think that was more of just like a fan thing. That was kind of a popular name out there amongst like message boards and things like that. I don't know if he visited Michigan State. I don't think he did. If he did, I missed it. Um, but he ends up at Northwestern. So that was kind of, again, that was more of a fan option for wide receiver than an actual realistic option. But we've seen a lot of these transfer guys who have been kind of linked to Michigan State or visited Michigan State end up at other places. Is that a concern at all, Aiden, going forward?
Yeah, it does concern a little bit just that there, besides Trey Mosley, there's not really a veteran with a ton of experience in that wide receiver room right now. I'm pretty sure the only transfer that's still in the portal that has taken a visit to MSU that's a receiver is Alante Brown from Nebraska, and
Right.
he still seems to be taking visits elsewhere. So my guess is they either struck out with him or they told him they don't want him. So just in that sense, I think right now it's really up to Courtney Hawkins, the wide receivers coach. Kind of, he's probably making calls still, but it seems that he might be comfortable with the room that he has right now. From the outside, just because they haven't taken anyone, it may seem that way. It seems that way a little bit,
Right.
but at the same time, they did seem to be going after Walker and Harrell pretty hard for a little while. And you would have thought that they would have had a better shot with Walker just because he went to Grand Valley. It's just, an hour and a half down the road. So you would think they have a better shot, but he ends up going to A&M, and then Harrell goes to Miami. So it really makes you wonder. Kind of, I'm sure that'll be a big question at the next press conference for Tucker and or Hawkins, for both of them, and with this transfer portal, and just kind of where they're at right now because they're also losing other guys like Keon Stewart. So
Right.
yeah, it really makes you wonder, and you wonder also about kind of the outside factors, like NIL. How much does that
Right.
play a factor into that? I know Miami and A&M both have very large collectives handing out
Right.
new like large sums of money. So it's kind of they've identified these players, but these other programs that seem to be spending a lot more have also identified these players as prospects and top targets in the transfer portal.
Right. I just want to pull up the question from Kyle right here. What injury did Christian Fitzpatrick have last year, if any? Yeah, I remember he was banged up a little bit. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember how serious it was, or if it was serious, or if it was just one of the situations where, I mean, he was already behind Reed and Coleman and Trey Mosley, so, and probably maybe Jeremy Bernard too last year. I know Jeremy got a lot of snaps early on in the season. And so it might have been a combination of being a little banged up and also being behind some of these other guys on the depth chart. So I mean, yeah, he'll have an opportunity this year, and I know Jay Johnson had some good things to say about him during spring practice this year. There was some Christian was made available for media availability also, but I wasn't there that day, so I didn't get to hear from him directly. But yeah, he'll be a guy who has an opportunity. I mean, there's opportunities are abound now. I mean, like you said, Trey Mosley in the slot is about the only thing that you can write in pen at wide receiver right now. So Montori Foster, is another guy who's going to get a shot. I still do believe at some point Michigan State's going to bring in a transfer wide receiver. I just don't know who that might be at this point. And to your point, Aiden, Alante Brown, he visited almost a month ago. I think it was April
Yeah.
18th.
He visited during the spring game, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and
Or
so
even
nothing really
before.
came of that. And so I mean, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. I kind of perceive it as maybe Michigan State's coaching staff wanting to explore other options.
Mhm.
And maybe they circle back to Alante now. But or that whatever meetings they had just didn't like the vibe there and decided to go in a different direction. I'm not sure. I'm not privy to that information, but obviously we're going to keep an eye on the wide receiver position as spring kind of turns into summer here, and we'll see what they do. We'll just get Jess's question out of the way too while we're answering question. Do you think Michigan State would fire Tucker if State went 5-7 or worse next season? No, I do not think so. Um, if I'm going to try to have like a realistic conversation here, um, I think at worst Michigan State goes 4-8 next year. Uh, that's a win over Central. That's a win over Richmond. And then you win 2 out of 3 against Rutgers, Indiana, and Nebraska. Like that's so at worst, I think they go 4-8. That's not good. That would raise a lot of alarm bells and would potentially put Tucker on the hot seat for the next season. But I mean, they just signed the guy to a 10-year, $95 million contract extension. That's a ton of money to just eat uh, 2 years later, or less than 2 years later, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
I just can't see it happening. Especially given, and you can, I mean, sure, you can blame part of this on Tucker and part of this on the coaching staff, but given everything that's happened this spring, uh, post spring practice with Peyton transferring and Keon transferring, and we got guys committing and then decommitting. Yeah, like that's a lot of part of that's on the coaching staff for sure. There's no doubt, but I just still think it's too early in Mel Tucker's tenure to have a solidified opinion. And I'll go as far as to say, in 2020, when Michigan State went 2-5, I think they overachieved. They beat Michigan in Ann Arbor. Um, Tucker was hired in February. I think it was after signing
After
day.
signing day, yeah.
After signing day, I think D'Antonio not transferred. D'Antonio resigned either on signing day or the day before or something like that. So that first year, Tucker comes in and at the end of February, COVID hits midway through March. There's no spring practice. There's no recruiting on campus. Everything's through Zoom. And so like expectations for Michigan State going into 2020 should have been, can you win a game? Period. They won two, and one of them was against Michigan. That's overachieving in my book. And then the next season, they bring in Kenneth Walker, and Kenneth Walker deserves the vast majority of the credit for that 11-2 season. But Tucker still is the guy who identified him out of the transfer portal and brought him here. And
Mhm.
so they exceed expectations for the second year. And then last year everything kind of crashed and burned. There's no denying that. So no, I don't think Tucker is on the hot seat. Aiden and I have discussed this. We have to see how this season plays out before any kind of hot seat talk has any merit, really. So that's the way I answer that question. Do you have anything to add, Aiden? I kind of just took over there, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's on the hot seat whatsoever, but I will say about this, I think if, there's a repeat of last season where they go 4-8 or 5-7, I think there will be some questions raised about Tucker. And I think the big thing is we know he can identify talent both for recruits and for coaching staff. He's lost, I think he's lost 3 coaches to larger programs or the NFL. Um, and then you have guys like Marco Coleman, who end up going back to Georgia Tech, where that's his alma mater.
Right.
So it's like you can't really blame him for that. So,
Nope.
but he's identified these coaches that end up going, getting bigger jobs, getting paid. Like Will Peagler, when he was the initial running backs coach at MSU, he went and got hired at Florida for double the money he was making. I mean, like Brandon Jordan goes to the Seahawks,
Yep.
and now Peagler is at the with the Arizona Cardinals. So it's they can identify talent, but it's continuing to both find that talent and keeping it. And it seems to me, um, there does seem an issue with NIL money in terms of Tucker really wants to compete with the best of the best, and that's
Right.
been apparent. You know, they've been in these recruiting battles with these 4 and 5 star guys who are going to, Miami, who are getting guaranteed money that's in the millions. So it does seem he is trying to punch a little bit above his weight, but honestly, it comes down to NIL right now. I think
Right.
that's the name of the game, and I think MSU, they've done a good job so far with NIL, but it's really taking that to the next level that's going to be important, and that's not entirely in his hands and the coaching staff in general. You have to get boosters, you have to find, collectives and establish those, and kind of, it's still changing. It's still an ongoing thing. We're only what 2 years into NIL, not even.
Right.
So it's just still changing. So finding kind of an establishment there is really going to be the big piece. But in terms of having an eye for talent, it's clear that Tucker does have an eye for talent,
Right.
and he does believe in, the coaching staff that is there and the players that are there. And yeah, obviously, Coleman and Thorne leaving, it does question the culture, but there still seems to be a high level of buy-in even after 5 and 7.
Right. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about NIL once we get to the Kee'yon Stewart topic with the TCU transfer who committed
Hmm.
to Michigan State and then flipped to Arkansas. I'm going to get into more of that, but I did want to answer Carrie's question because I think it's kind of important. And I appreciate the question. He says, "At what point are we done talking or thinking about Coleman? Kind of feels like beating an issue to death." First off, no need to apologize. You're not being a jerk. I understand this completely because I've gotten a few different comments like this when I've posted stories on our Facebook page. We're talking about Coleman today because he committed to Florida State today, and that kind of puts kind of a cap on this whole transfer portal saga with him and Peyton. So yeah, we're gonna talk. We wanted to talk about it today. Thought it was important, but we're putting this issue to bed after we talk about it today in this pod. There's no reason to, as you mentioned, to keep going back to it. Michigan State fans are ready to move on. Aiden and I are ready to move on too, but we have to talk about it today.
Right.
Um, and yeah, like and I mentioned when Peyton committed to Auburn, and our next show we talked about that for a while. Um, and I said during that podcast, I said, I'm still going to keep an eye on Peyton and see how he does in Auburn. I'm just curious how that plays out. I'm still going to keep an eye on Keon and see what his numbers look like at the end of this year or as we're going through it. But the only way that gets brought up by us during the football season, and it may, either one of those guys, is if Peyton goes and kills it at Auburn and Michigan State's struggling at quarterback here, yeah, it might come up in conversation. If Michigan State is having a hard time finding wide receivers for their young quarterbacks to target, maybe Keon comes back in the conversation in fall. But as far as right now, we want to talk about it. Thought it was important today, but we're putting it to bed after this podcast. So thank you for the question. I appreciate that. He also says just kind of a wait and see, trust the process. And this is kind of where Aiden and I are at too.
Yeah.
It's too early to make judgments on Mel Tucker's tenure. I know a lot of people are doing it, and I don't blame people for doing it. Like, for one thing, it's May, and we need things to talk about because we got 3 more months until college football's back. And the other part of that is when you have such a high in 2021 and then a low in 2022, that just breeds discussion anyway. So I totally get it, but we really do need to just take a step back, let the rest of the spring play out, let the rest of the roster additions and subtractions kind of play out as the next months come, and then just see how the season plays out and take it one game at a time. I know that's total coach speak from me, and I don't like that in press conferences, but sometimes it's just true. You just got to take it a little by little and just see how it plays out. And you know, Aiden and I, we're not paid to sit here and defend Michigan State either. Like, we have a vested interest in how they do just because we cover the team. But if things go off the rails this fall, we'll talk about it and we'll
Mhm.
discuss it. And absolutely, if things go in the other direction, and all of a sudden this team that nobody believes in, sounds a lot like 2021, starts winning some games and getting a little positive momentum, we're absolutely going to talk about that too. We just got to wait and see until we get there. Um, with that, let's move on to Kee'yon Stewart and this kind of this NIL thing. Kyle had a comment here. I'm not going to pull it up just now, but Kyle asks, "Is it pay to win?" It's ironic that teams that are paying the most have seen a huge increase in success. Won't mention programs specifically. I mean, yeah, in the era of NIL, the teams who are dishing out a lot of money are going to get a lot of high profile recruits. That's what Texas A&M did with their recruiting class a couple years ago. Kind of fell flat. They went they paid all that money for the number one recruiting class. And they ended up with the same record as Michigan State. So good work, Texas A&M. But yeah, like Miami is one of those programs who every time it seems like you hear about some tampering stuff or recruits getting offered large sums to either stay in Florida or whatnot. Usually Miami comes up. Texas A&M is one of those. Um, so, and that brings us to Kee'yon Stewart. So Kee'yon Stewart commits to Michigan State on May 6th. He's a guy who was kind of expected to, at minimum, step in and be in the two deep for Michigan State's cornerback rotation. Maybe he even starts opposite um, Charles Brantley, who Aiden and I expect to be the starter, one of the starters at corner next year.
Mhm.
And then today, right before Keon Coleman commits to Florida State, like I'm talking minutes before, Keon Stewart puts out a graphic on social media that says, "This is where I belong," and it's him in Arkansas, an Arkansas jersey. And so this is a guy too. So he commits to Michigan State on May 6th. On May 9th, he has an Instagram post or story that goes up that says practically that programs are still recruiting him despite him being committed to Michigan State, and he hadn't signed anything. So I mean, that's not a huge breaking story or anything like that. But in my opinion, and this isn't based on anything other than my opinion, Arkansas probably came and offered him a better NIL deal, and that's the world we live in. And so he gets a better offer. They give a pitch, and he's like, "See you later. I'm off to Arkansas now." So again, this is just kind of where we're at with this the modern era of college football. There is no loyalty, and I don't even say that as a these darn college kids or these darn high school kids, they don't have any loyalty. They don't. I'm not saying it like that. Like, I don't mean it like that. I understand that um, college football is a business. It's been a business for a long time. It was a business long before NIL and the one-time transfer rule became a thing. And for a large portion of college football history, the players have been cut out of that. Like, they haven't had shared revenue with TV revenue. They still don't. But So I don't blame the players. It makes me roll my eyes, and I'd like to think I would do things a little differently if I was in that position, but I'm not in that position. So who cares what
Mhm.
who cares what I would do? But it is kind of just that nasty side of where we're at as a sport with college football. You and I were texting back and forth, Aiden, as kind of all this is going down.
Yeah.
You let me know that Keon was going to decide today, and then an hour later I'd say, hey, by the way, Stewart's committed to Arkansas now. So just kind of your reaction to this news, Aiden, and what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've plugged them a few times, but Josh Pate had a podcast
Yeah,
earlier this week talking about tampering and he kind of led it with, Pat Narduzzi has been one of the most vocal coaches, if not the most vocal coaches, in talking about tampering and other teams kind of tampering with his players, and he kind of indicated like if it's that big of a problem, why don't you speak up? And teams, coaches won't really speak up because, they're probably tampering too.
right,
So, I mean, it's part of the game now. I think it's always been part of college football, but we're seeing it so much more now with NIL and the way that teams are weaponizing NIL and using it to their advantage. I mean, cheating has happened forever, so it's not that big a deal to me because I mean, there's always the like, if you're not cheating, you're not winning.
right.
So, I mean, I do believe that in a sense, but but yeah, just going back to that with Stewart, yeah, there's NIL and kind of what Josh Pate was talking about was, are we gonna see a college football players association? Like, how are we gonna help prevent this from, just I mean, it's already the Wild West, but
Oh
how are
yeah,
we gonna prevent this from going even further, like, extreme down this road of just entering the portal and then committing to a school and then flipping to another one? And yeah, I mean, like you were saying, I don't really blame the players. I mean, I'm 21 right now. If you put a load of money in front of me, I'm not gonna say no. Like, so yeah, I mean, in that sense, like, I don't blame the players, but again, there needs to be kind of an established base of what to do in these situations, and I think Michigan State is learning that the hard way. And yeah, I mean, this is definitely kind of the roughest they've been in terms of the transfer portal. I know they did really well in 2021 and they did pretty well last season too. They got a lot of players who, maybe didn't play as much last season but will play a lot more and show improvement this year in that sense. So, yeah, it really is a work in progress, but kinda going back to what I was saying earlier is just I think right now it comes down to NIL, and that's what it is, and, I don't know why Stewart left, there's no exact reasons, but there is a safe assumption there that there was some sort of NIL with that, so, yeah, just with that said, um you know, we didn't really see him at all, and he could have added some depth to this DB group, but it didn't work out.
Right. That's a good way of putting it too. It's not like Michigan State is losing something from off the field.
Mhm.
We never got to see him in a Spartan helmet, and we never will. Um, how I know you're like, and for any audience members who don't know, Aiden is a student right now at Michigan State. How far into your degree are you, Aiden? I'm just curious.
Oh, I'll be done in December.
Oh, so you're
Oh, yeah, yeah, I'm almost done.
kind of a silly question then, but I was
Yeah.
just gonna ask you if Arkansas offered you the rest of your tuition to be paid off, are you transferring to Arkansas?
I mean, if my credits transfer, then yeah.
Exactly, yeah, for sure. No,
Mhm.
I was making light of the situation there, but
No.
um, yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right now with that. Yeah, added depth at in the secondary would have been nice, and who knows, Michigan State probably goes shopping again now for another DB.
Mm.
And we'll see what they do there. Just going to throw up Kyle's comment here, and this pertains to NIL some more too. Um, I'm just going to kind of take this question and alter it just a little bit and just say that, like, yeah, I mean, when you compare Michigan State to what Michigan and Ohio State are doing right now, um, it's a downward trajectory. 2021 Michigan State goes 11-2. They beat Michigan. They got beat pretty handily by Ohio State, but they were kind of like still firmly in that mix for the Big Ten East powers. If you talk about Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan State, like for a good chunk there, it was like a 4-team gauntlet that everybody had to kind of go through. If you were one of those teams, you got to play only 3 of them, obviously. But then poor Rutgers, poor Indiana, poor Maryland, they had to play all 4 of those. Well, Michigan State's dropped off a little bit here. Um, I just go back to this season, and it's just important for Michigan State to show improvement this fall. Um, and like that bar has to be make a bowl game, get that extra practice, get that extra publicity, and that shows you can sell that to recruits going forward. Hey, yeah, we had a bad year in 2022. We went 5-7. Next year we won 6 games, or next year we won 7 games, and just show that 2021 was not the blip in the radar, and we're just not a good program. It's just no, like, we found a generational player that year. He lifted us to new heights. In 2022, we got to see more of the underbelly of how much of a rebuild was still required here, and now we're headed back in the right direction. That's what you got to do. That's going to get recruiting going again. Um, and even with recruiting, we're going to see this summer, like, Michigan State's not going to end the year with 3 guys committed to their recruiting class. They're gonna land some guys this summer as they bring people in for official visits and all those things. It's been a really bad 3 weeks for Michigan State, just from on the field, but also from a perception standpoint. Um, that's not going to carry all the way into the season. They're going to get some momentum going this summer on the recruiting trail. Might not be 5-star guys. It might not be even high, 4-star guys, but things are going to trend. Things are going to swing back in the right direction. And really, again, this is a coach speak cliche thing. You really can't focus on Michigan and Ohio State right now. You got to focus on the building blocks of your own program. And in terms of NIL, I don't think, maybe I'm wrong here. And Aiden, if you disagree with me, feel free to jump in. But I don't think, like, Michigan State is lagging way behind in NIL or anything like that. It's just hard to compete with the likes of a lot of these SEC programs, the Texas schools. And yeah, Michigan has kind of upped their ante on NIL in the last year or so. Ohio State is going to be, a challenge to to be able to match with. But Michigan State has enough wealthy donors that I think they're going to be okay. And this is gonna, as Aiden mentioned, we're only 2 years into NIL, and this is gonna evolve and change a lot over the next couple of years too. So I don't think we need to hit the panic button on the program. I don't think we need to hit the panic button on NIL or Michigan State's collectives or anything like that. Any thoughts on that, Aiden?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's kind of where I'm at, where I don't think NIL is struggling, but if you are going to try to compete with, the Miamis, the Texas A&Ms, the Ohio States, the Michigans, for, 4 and 5-star recruits, NIL does have to be better. Um,
Right.
I mean, yeah, I mean, going back to that question, like, can MSU keep up? without spending the same as those programs? I mean, the answer is yes, we've seen it before pre NIL, but
Right.
it's kind of how is the Mel Tucker blueprint gonna work? Like, how is that gonna work opposed to the D'Antonio blueprint, where the D'Antonio blueprint was kind of get these 3-star guys out of Ohio,
Yep.
get a couple 4 stars from Michigan and kind of the Midwest area, and really recruit off more emotion based, kind of like you feel slighted that you didn't get an offer from Michigan or didn't get an offer from Ohio State or, wherever. Come play for us. We play them every year and you
Yep.
can prove to them why like they should regret not recruiting you. And that
Right.
was kind of the blueprint there. And the blueprint for Mel Tucker is more that's not, we saw at the end of D'Antonio's era, that's not really sustainable for a long period of time. And, what's more sustainable is you really have to, recruit. It's an everyday thing. You can't just stop recruiting when the season comes around. It's an everyday grind. You have to get those 4 and 5 star guys to really, not even 5 star guys. You just have to get, a lot more 4 star players to compete on a yearly basis for, a Big Ten title or just even, 9 wins. Like
Sure.
there are two different blueprints, and part of me goes back and not to be like the whole get off my lawn guy, but part of me is like I really wish that they would just get a couple 3 stars from Ohio
Yeah.
and just, have that in their back pocket rather than go and try to recruit some, 4 star guys from Florida that it doesn't seem they have much luck with right now.
Right.
But part of me does know that I think it's the 2010 or 2011 Auburn team, whichever year. I think it's 2010, the year they won the national
I
championship.
believe so. Yes.
And that team and the first Clemson team to win a national championship, I think that was 2016. Those are the only two teams where if you look up their 24/7 talent composite, where they and their blue chip ratio, where they had less than, I think it was like 60% of their team was 4 stars. It was
Hmm.
or 4 or 5 stars. So there is data that shows like if you want to be a, you know, playoff contender or, a national championship contender for the long run, you do have to build up that roster to be, over half the team needs to be 4 star recruits. Um, so I do see Tucker's vision in that.
Right.
And it does make a lot of sense, but at the same time, um, yeah, again, if you keep striking out on these 4 and 5 star guys, you're eventually gonna have to go back to the drawing board and be like, hey, we still gotta fill out these classes. Last season they only got 20 high school recruits. So it's like we need to go back to the drawing board and still go grab, X number of guys from Ohio that are, 3 stars and kind
Sure.
of lower, less recruited players.
Yeah, and the brilliance of the D'Antonio era too was, to your point, they brought in these kids who felt slighted and had that chip on their shoulder. Again, a cliche, but
Hmm.
it was just true.
Hmm.
And then they're like, hey, let's take these kids and let's go beat Michigan's butt with them, and it worked. I mean, but the true brilliance of that from D'Antonio in the height of the D'Antonio era was they were taking these kids and developing the heck out of them. Like Michigan
Hmm.
State's roster development during that time was on a different level. You have to get back to that now. To your point, like, yeah, you can swing big on some of these 5 star and four and high 4 star guys that you bring to campus,
Hmm.
but you got to have a backup plan when you don't land some of these guys who you think you are going to get. And again, to your point. Lou Fickell at Cincinnati. He takes a bunch of 3 stars from Ohio and builds Cincinnati into a power in the American Conference, goes to a playoff game. And yeah, they got beat by Alabama. There's no shame in that. I mean, they were fairly competitive in that
Hmm.
playoff game. When you're talking about, one of the best rosters ever assembled in college
Hmm.
football, when you're talking about, the different teams Alabama's had, but like you can have success in that way. And Ohio is a rich recruiting ground. Michigan has upped its efforts in Ohio the last couple of years, and what do you know? They knock off Ohio State a couple times. I'm not saying there's a direct correlation there, but there is something about getting some kids who are pissed off and
Right.
bring them into your program and just put
100%.
and put that seed in their heads like, hey, come here, work your tail off, and let's go prove it to these guys. I'm trying to keep it, PG here. Go prove it to these guys that
Yeah.
they made a mistake. Um,
Hmm.
and so yeah, there's a lot of value to that. Um, and so yeah, just I agree 100% with you. There's got to be, and maybe that starts to happen now that Michigan State has brought in a new recruiting director. In I can't remember his first name. His last name's DeThorne. Um, but they have
Hmm.
a new recruiting director, and we'll see what kind of strategy is implemented now that they kind of have a new voice in the room. Because it did seem like under the previous regime with Saeed Khalif or Khalif
Yep.
Saeed, it did seem like all the chips were kind of put into those big, flashy baskets of the 5 star guys and some of these high 4 star guys, and then when it kind of fell flat with some of them, you land by Job, you land Andrew DePepe, who was a solid 4 star recruit, but some of the other ones it just didn't. They didn't have a backup plan after not landing some of these kids, and that just it just can't happen. But again, that goes back to the no need to panic. Let's see how it plays out category. So I did want to get to Carrie's comment about it's not a student athlete thing anymore. And here's where I want to go. Here's where I want to go with this. Um, we mentioned earlier, neither one of us blame the athletes or the players for going out and getting the best deals that they can get and all of that stuff and kind of jumping ship and things like that. Whatever. From a professional standpoint, I totally understand it. I will say, if that's how you want to be treated, where you can transfer, the one-time transfer, no penalty, where you can earn NIL money, I'm cool with that. I'm pro player on that, on those things. I have been from the start. But I also will say you are now open for more criticism as well. Like if you want to be treated like an adult, I'm going to treat you like an adult. And so I'm not going to sit here and personally attack, Peyton Thorne or Keon Coleman or any of these other guys who make these kind of decisions. That's not. I'm not going to get up on a soapbox and do that. But I will say, like, um, again, you open yourself up to be treated like a professional athlete, and guys who play in the NFL, they have to sit in front of the media, and they're contractually obligated to do that and answer questions. And so there's a two-sided coin there. This is the point I'm trying to make. Um, I guess I'll leave it at that. I was gonna get into something a little more specific, but I won't because I just don't think there's any value in it. But any thoughts on that, Aiden? As far as Kerry says right here, it's about performance, and you're open for more criticism.
Yeah. I mean, we see kind of how MSU is struggling now, but MSU is far from, being in the worst situation in terms of programs. I know a lot of group of five schools are really voicing their concerns right now because they're just turning into farm systems for, Power Five schools where a lot of players from the MAC, it's like they have a breakout season and then, they're getting calls from you know, every Power Five conference, trying to get deals. So yeah, I mean, it is about performance. I do think it has always been about performance. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is just the new era of college football.
Yeah,
and I don't really think it's going to change much. And some may like it, some may not. But it's definitely here to stay. Is That's kind of all I'll say.
Right. And again, I'm not trying to make a huge deal out of this too, but I will say there is a bit of a difference um, between Peyton Thorne and Keon, just in the sense that at least Peyton graduated from Michigan State. Like he earned his degree at Michigan State before leaving. Again, not going to make a huge deal out of that, but Michigan State has this whole Spartan dog for life thing. It's a hashtag. It's what they talk about. And I'm not saying that Keon's out of the club because he didn't graduate. I'm not saying that directly, but I think it does carry a little bit more weight if you're Peyton to have that degree in your hand. I don't know. Am I out of line there?
I mean, I don't know. It doesn't really bother me that much. But yeah, it does it I know that was a big deal when I want to say it was Rocket Watts when he transferred. There was like a whole, argument on Twitter about being like a Spartan dog and everything like that. And because he was friends with everyone, he's a Michigan guy and like,
Hmm.
being friends with people on the team. I don't think that really bothers me. Keon was I mean, last season he was great for
Yeah,
MSU, so I can't. I mean, yeah, I don't think there's any ill will from other players towards him, and I think if he came back to MSU after he graduated and is in the pros, like I don't think anyone is gonna slight him for what he did. I think his time here was memorable.
yeah, that's fair. And
Yeah,
and to your point too, like after a few years, time's gonna heal the wound, if you will, a little bit too. Especially like let's just say I'll just throw this out there. Let's say like in 5 years' time, Mel Tucker's still here, and then they've kind of righted the ship, and they're competing for Big Ten championships, or they're in their race at least, and they're winning 8, 9, 10 games or more per season. Um, if that happens and Keon comes back, Keon's going to be looked at as like one of these foundational guys because he was part of Mel Tucker's first recruiting class. And so yeah, that's a good way of looking at it too. Uh, so yeah, I just a little bit of a off topic there, but I saw this comment from Carrie, and that's kind of where my mind went to, was there. We are up over an hour here. Scott McGraw just come in. Sorry to join late. Coaches preach his loyalty, and there is none. Well, that's kind of where we're at in in college sports right now. There isn't a lot of loyalty. I mean, it kind of, if we want to put, I don't know about a positive spin, but if we want to end more on a happier note, it really does put into perspective how unbelievable of a job that Tom Izzo has done with his program. And I know like Julius Marble transferred to Texas A&M. That had everything to do with his dad
yeah,
passing
personal
away.
concern. Yeah.
Yeah, his dad passed away. He wanted to be closer to home. Like absolutely zero criticism is warranted for that transfer. And good on Julius. I think Julius had a pretty decent year this
Yeah,
last
he
year with Texas
did.
A&M too. So good for him. And um and Izzo is picky about who he brings into the program. He brings in Tyson Walker, great pickup. Michigan State's not in the position it is as a program right now without Tyson Walker. Um, Joey Hauser, same thing. It took a couple of years, and there was a lot of frustration in those first couple of years with Joey. Before this last year, where he really just, I mean, the way he shot the ball this year was just, I was just on a human level, I was really happy for Joey just to have the kind of season that he had, because I know the last couple of years were tough for him. So just to kind of
Mhm.
see him kind of realize that potential that he showed at Marquette before coming and help lead this team to the Sweet 16, and I was just happy for him on a personal level. But I just, again, I wanted to highlight just uh, how much of a throwback Tom Izzo's program is, And I just my respect for him as a college basketball coach just continues to go up with how he's handled, the shifting things. And I know there's been some frustration, particularly last offseason when he didn't bring in like a center or somebody.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I guess I'll open the floor to you, Aiden, one more time as we wrap up here. Just to any thoughts on Michigan State basketball in the midst of all of this football kind of negativity that we've had to deal with over the last 3 weeks? Any new thoughts about the basketball team? Um, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but
Yeah, I mean, there is Moneyball coming up in July, I think. And then, yeah, I mean, I haven't really been doing a ton of basketball stuff. I know there was a showcase for, I can't remember if it was like Ball is Life or Overtime or something, but all of the incoming class besides Xavier Booker was in it, and Jeremy Fears, Cohen Carr, and Garrick Norman all put on a show. So there is some hope for them to really break out this year. Uh, yeah, I mean, there, like you said, there is a lot of buy-in. Izzo has really done a good job in terms of uh, keeping guys after the transfer portal, and adding the right players. I know back before they got Walker, it was really a battle with him and the assistant coaches to bring someone in, and he
right,
didn't really feel comfortable bringing someone in. And I think there was a little bit of struggle even when Walker came into the program, of whether or not they should have brought someone different, or brought more players in, or a different player. But I mean, in the long run, it looks really good, the way he brought Walker in. And yeah, I mean, this season is definitely one that fans are already talking about, that they were
right,
talking about right after they lost to Kansas State. It was looking forward to this season, or this
right,
upcoming season. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like, um, and we'll see.
right. And I could be wrong on this, but I believe May 31st is the deadline for undergraduates who have entered their names into the NBA draft, and so we should get some news about AJ Hogard and Jaden Akins pretty
Mhm.
soon about their final decisions. Aiden and I have discussed this on an episode earlier this spring, but we expect both guys to be back, and I think most people do. But just to kind of get that formally, um, it will be nice in the coming weeks. And I mean, I don't even want to get into this topic, but like uh, Jaden Akins, of the two, Jaden Akins is the more likely to stay in the draft, and if that does happen, it would be a tough pill to swallow a little bit. I mean, we'd be happy for him, but just because there's so much excitement and he figures to be such a big part of next year's team, it would be a bit of a blow. But the team has depth, and like I said, we do expect those guys to come back. And so we'll keep an eye out on that, and of course we'll continue to keep an eye on Michigan State football's efforts in the transfer portal and continue to bring those things. One last note here: I'm not going to make it into a subject because we're already well over an hour here. Um, but Michigan State did lose a commitment from four-star cornerback Jamari Howard. He decommitted, reopened his recruitment. This was something that was expected for quite a while before the news, before Jamari officially decommitted. He's a Florida kid who, when Michigan State got his commitment, he was still a four-star, but like a little bit lower in the rankings, and he's seen his recruitment really take off in the last couple of weeks and or months. And so this is kind of expected development. Again, an unfortunate thing, but as I mentioned before, Michigan State does have quite a few high end prospects going to be on campus this summer. So I think Michigan State's recruiting will be okay and start to trend back in the right direction as we get into the summer months. But just wanted to make a quick note on that. Um, And yeah, I think that's about it for tonight. Appreciate everybody joining in and listening in. If you could follow us on YouTube at Spartan Nation Podcast, every subscriber helps. It helps us to continue to bring you this content for free. There's no charge to subscribe. All you got to do is hit the button, and you'll have us on there. Also, follow us on Facebook at Spartan Nation. And yeah, we appreciate everybody tuning in. And thanks a lot. Appreciate it.